Well, Andrew, while we're waiting for everyone to officially join, do you want to just kick us off and maybe kind of give an overview of Strategic Talent Partners and maybe introduce what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we are going to be talking about solving the uncertainty, aligning your talent strategy with your business strategy. And the reason this topic is so important is because we have been doing a lot of work with clients around this specific approach, looking forward with your talent and not being reactive. So if we want to go to the next slide, who is Strategic Talent Partners? And again, why are we talking about this topic? We have a lot of experience in these areas, 25 years of experience to be exact, recruiting and developing leaders who are aligned with a company's unique culture. And not only that, but leaders that can help companies continue to build their business strategy through their people. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is get our company to the next phase of growth with the right set of people in the right seats. And we've kind of overall learned how to do this through thousands of conversations with business owners and leadership teams around creating talent roadmaps to align with these business strategies, right? And our mission at Strategic Talent Partners is to solve the uncertainty and help you achieve your growth goals through your people. So one more slide here. And I'll take the honor of introducing our speaker today, Rick Rittmaster, our principal and leadership solutions practice lead. Rick is very, very humble. He doesn't like to talk about himself and all the wonderful achievements and experiences that he has. So I'm happy to do it for him. He's an expert in leadership and talent development. He's also an expert in organizational development and helping companies, again, get where they want to go through their people. He's worked in both small and large organizations, leading all the way up into enterprise, and worked with hundreds of business leaders to help align their talent with their strategy. He's a problem solver, understands root causes of things, leadership challenges especially. And we have, through Rick, developed practical solutions to help businesses solve those leadership challenges. Touched on his experience already, but master's degree in organizational psychology, 10 plus years in talent management. And you can see the companies there, some large scale public companies, global companies that Rick was working with for quite a long time before he came to what was then Core Talent and now Strategic Talent Partners to start the leadership solutions practice here. And it has grown over the last 3 to 4 years into quite an impressive practice where we work with many clients on their talent strategies. So regular speaker as well at national leadership conferences, including the 2024 EOS National Conference last year. And Rick will also be speaking at a couple more conferences this year, one coming up in April, the National Short Line Railroad Association Conference as well. So it's a pleasure to introduce Rick for today's topic, and I'll kick it over to him.
Thank you, Andrew. For those of you wondering, yes, I did absolutely pay Andrew to say all those nice things about me. I appreciate you prefacing that as an honor. It could equally be considered a punishment. So thank you for your positive attitude.
I have not received a check yet. So if anybody just check back after, we'll see if it's arrived in the mail.
Must be in the mail. Must be in the mail. Give it another day or two, Andrew. I am excited to be here today. I'm very excited about this topic. We've been working hard on the materials. I got my hair cut for this webinar, so I'm feeling like we're set up for success for our time together today. Now, before we get into our content, I want to actually start with a story. And Andrew, thank you for that preface, right? We are here to talk about some of the challenges that we see on a daily basis with owners and executives and leaders that are really earnestly trying to help their business grow, trying to add more value to their clients and constituents, and struggling to get their teams to a point where everything's clicking, everything's operating as effectively as it could. And we're excited to share some of the lessons that we've learned over our 25 years of experience, as well as some of the tools and resources that we have to share. And so to get us started, I want to share a story. And this is around a client that we've had the good fortune of working with for the past handful of years, about 3 or 4 years. They're a large construction company. And when I first started working with the owner of this company, we were doing our normal line of questioning, trying to understand his perspectives, where he thought his company was doing well and what some of the challenges were that he was experiencing. And yeah, this is a very standard question for someone in my line of work to ask. I was like, if you could just wave a magic wand, what would that future state look like? And there was kind of this long pause on the other end of the call. And then finally he said, I wish it would look like the way it did back in 2016. And it was such a galvanizing moment for me because in some regards, this owner had earned the right to experience the challenges that he was experiencing. And really, what he was trying to say was, I wanted to go back to a time when the teams were smaller. It was kind of just about getting the work done. Everybody kind of just wore a lot of hats. We didn't have to worry about job descriptions. We didn't have to worry about goals. It was more fun, maybe. When in reality, he had done an excellent job growing his business, and he had these two thriving functions in his business. And because his business was growing, there was more levels, and because there was more levels, there was more of a need to have true management skills and good leadership systems in place. And so it was just this really interesting moment where, despite the firm's success, despite from an external perspective, this really clear lens around what accomplishments were being strung together, there was this internal desire to rewind the clock, right? And go back to this way when it was simpler. The reality is that's not possible, right? I mean, I suppose you could truncate your business, but the majority of us don't want to do this, right? The majority of us want to keep growing, but grow in a way where we're still having fun and we're still getting really good work done and the team is aligned with the mission of the organization. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. How do you make sure that you have the right leaders in place so that they're driving growth in your teams and your businesses continue to grow and thrive? So we're going to cover this topic, but it's going to be equal part webinar as it is a working session. My wonderful colleague, Sophie, she just sent out a worksheet that we're actually going to use as a guide throughout this webinar today. I want it to feel engaging and interactive. I want this to be a good use of your time. You're taking an hour out of your busy day. You should get something as a result of it. And so as you see the 3 objectives on the screen, we'll actually have sort of these practical exercises where you'll be able to put pen to paper or document some keystrokes around some of your opportunities and some of your challenges and maybe kind of advance your thinking in this area, right? How do we help my firm or my company grow through my people? If you didn't get it, just put it in the chat. We're monitoring. Oh, Sophie already did it. Thank you, Sophie. I appreciate that. So you can just download it too, right? If it didn't come through in your email inbox. All right, so let's get started today. I'm going to start by talking about the growth dilemma. Now, some of you have been in webinars in the past. I've referenced this concept before. It's definitely relevant to the topic today. So for those of you who haven't been exposed to this general concept of the growth dilemma, one of the very common challenges that we see in growing organizations is that the senior leader of the team is driving strategy. So we're just going to talk about kind of that most senior leadership team, right? Where it's the owner and the executives of the company. And so, the company's growing, you're adding capability in your organization, you're trying to chart strategy, right? So you're trying to do things that are going to maybe add more value to the business and to your clients and customers further down the road. But it's hard. It's hard to get everything done. And so what we often see is that the business starts to grow maybe at a little faster pace than the leaders of the business can keep up with. And then there starts to become this gap where the roles, a leadership role is growing, and it's hard for that leader to keep pace with how the role is growing. And so the only person that can realistically fill that gap is the senior leader of the team. So using the example that we have here on the screen, what this is really talking about is that as a business grows, as the function grows, as the leadership role grows, it's the owner that has to fill in this gap. So the owner is going and they're doing part of the sales leader's job, and they're maybe filling in for part of the ops leader's job, and then maybe they're doing some of the finance leader's job as well. And so there starts to become this imbalance over time, and this imbalance really starts to impact strategy, and it really starts to limit or constrain a team's ability to keep the business moving forward. Now, I'm going to reiterate this on the next slide here, but this isn't exclusive to senior leadership teams, right? This is felt really at all levels of the organization, and really it's most acute at the leadership team because these functional leaders have so much responsibilities, right? They're responsible for an entire portion of the business. So the key takeaways from the growth dilemma are that this is incredibly common. And if you've ever heard Mike Frommelt, one of our co-founders, him speak, he does an excellent job. He has a whole talk on the growth dilemma and how owners really need to have a handle on the growth dilemma if they want to drive growth in their businesses, because they're constantly swooping in and doing the roles of the senior leadership team. The business is never gonna be as successful as it can. So the growth dilemma is a very common challenge, albeit a challenge that needs to be solved. As I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, it happens at every level. So in these webinar formats, we'll often use the owner and the senior leadership team as an example, but we could just as easily say, the finance leader is constantly swooping in and maybe doing roles on the finance leadership team as well. So it's not exclusive to the leadership team. Now, the last one is something that we've touched on maybe our last webinar. So if you were in our last webinar, we talked almost the entire time about our growth leadership model. And so left unchecked, what the growth dilemma will do is it will produce flat leaders. Now, what do I mean by that? Again, using our 25 years and thousands of conversations as a benchmark of experience, what we are really experts at, what we have come to see time and time and time again, is that if a company is not purposeful about building people management abilities, those like true leadership skills in their people managers, the people who are leading key portions of the business, over time, there tends to be this regression towards what we call flat leadership. And you can read faster than I can talk, so I'm not going to call out every bullet that you see on the slide. But at its highest level, a flat leader is somebody who's more oriented towards their technical expertise rather than managing and leading people. And the outcome, the byproduct of a flat leader, is that you tend to have this focus on status quo, right? Change doesn't happen as fast. Goals tend to be oriented around things that are maybe comfortable or more normal for what the leader has experienced. And there isn't this sort of strong emphasis on supporting others, right? It's kind of like, I'm just going to teach people how to do the things that I know how to do. And that's obviously in direct contrast with growth leadership. So growth leadership are leaders that really embrace ambiguity, can step into a situation and focus on how do I support people so I can set them up for success. Maybe act more as a facilitator and a guide, right? Rather than wield some predetermined sense of what needs to happen. Now, growing companies really need growth-based leaders. And we've worked with a lot of clients that are like, they say, Rick, this is really helpful because I think actually we have a lot of growth leaders in our organization, and this is a useful lens to start to identify where maybe we're not hitting the mark in terms of the key metrics that we set for ourselves. So the growth dilemma happens at all levels of the organization, super common, and left unchecked, over time, the growth dilemma tends to produce flat leaders because you have people that are more aligned with their technical expertise rather than leaning into the true leadership skills required to be successful, acting as that facilitator and that guide, for example. Now, if you don't address flat leaders, you don't grow as fast. You stick to the status quo, and then good people leave, and we see that too. So there is a risk associated with sort of not addressing flat leaders in your organization. Okay, the title of this webinar is Solve the Uncertainty. So I just sort of laid the business case down for why this is a problem, right? We don't want to experience the growth dilemma. We don't want to have flat leaders in our organization. I'm going to tell one more quick story before we actually jump into our worksheet and our tools here. So we talk to leaders all the time, owners, where we're looking at their business plan. Or if you're an EOS client, maybe we're looking at your VTO. And it's just beautiful, right? Like I have to give these owners credits when we meet with them and we talk to them. It's kind of like a baby, you know, like it's so thoughtful, and you know, there's this 10-year goal, and then you kind of work backwards, and there's these very strategic initiatives, and you know, you've got this just like very robust understanding of the marketplace and the strategies that the company is going to go use to go out into the marketplace and gain more market share and grow the business. I've never failed to be impressed by the strategies that get incorporated into a business plan. And then inevitably, at some point in time in the conversation, we'll ask the question, who's going to do this work? You know, there's a lot of new stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff that you haven't done before. Are you ready? Can you train people? And the sort of tongue-in-cheek response is, well, we'll figure that part out, Rick. You know, like for as much time and energy as we've put into our business strategies, the talent strategies, they just tend to get forgotten. And that's okay, right? Like, I think it's fair to prioritize the operational needs of executing on the business strategy. What we're going to basically argue for the next, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, is that without a talent strategy, your business strategy is always going to be incomplete. There's always going to be a sense of uncertainty in your business strategy without a talent strategy. And so the worksheet that we sent out, the exercises that we do with our clients, and you're going to get a taste of it today, really is about, do we have the talent in place in order to be successful for our business plan? So these are the questions that we're going to answer. We're going to talk about these three questions, and we're going to address all three of these questions with kind of our working session portion of this webinar. So we'll talk about what is the impact that our business goals are going to have on our company, what does our company look like based on our goals, and then what we need from leaders to sustainably drive growth. You might be saying, Rick, why is there a blue square at the top of that slide? It is not a mistake or a typo. The blue squares indicate where the slide corresponds to worksheet content. So this is just a good little reminder, you know, as we're listening and we're looking at the screen, I can have my worksheet up and I can kind of use it as a guide to engage with some of these materials. And I've been talking now for about 20 minutes straight. I apologize. This is as long as I'm going to talk continuously. We're going to get into some exercises. I'll give you a little bit of working time. I'll ask you to put some stuff in the chat. So we'll start to learn from each other as well. All right, so that first set of questions is around growth trajectory. At its most simple level, companies want to grow, and your amount of growth, right? How much you're trying to grow and the pace of growth, how quickly are you trying to grow? That has a huge impact on the internal resources necessary to be successful. And that's not a CapEx question per se. Obviously, if you're producing a good, you need to have the raw materials and the equipment to be successful. But we also, again, we don't want to forget about the talent strategy side of growing, right? We want to make sure that we're well staffed, that we're well trained, that the people have the ability in order to be successful. So I mentioned two of the criteria around growth trajectory, amount of growth, the size and the complexity, and then the pace of growth, right? How fast are we going to try and grow? Another one that we like to look at when we engage with a client is values and culture, right? Often values and culture are very well established for where you are today. Are they aspirationally oriented towards where you want to go? That's another important part of growth trajectory. And the simple math here is that if you're trying to grow significantly and fast, you must purchase talent from the external market. There's just not enough time, or it is unrealistic to expect internal talent to really be able to step up and do the job well. And it's often an aha moment for some clients, right? It's easy to spend a lot of time on your business plan and then maybe not extrapolate that big business plan in terms of how different is this work from what we're already doing today. If you're taking a more moderate approach to growth, or if it's maybe more on the incremental side, that's when things get exciting because now you can start to have a combination of talent acquisition and talent development. And you can build up where you have the opportunity to, and you can very strategically hire for the capabilities that you're not as confident you're able to build internally. Now, when we do this with a client, we look at all facets of the business. So we'll go through the growth trajectory for operations, sales and marketing, finance and administration, depending on how large the company is. If they have their own HR function, we'll look at that function as well. For today, we're just going to look at operations. And the assumption here is that no matter what company you're a part of, you've got an operations function. And so the first chunk of your worksheet is around the amount of growth for your operations function. So I'm going to just talk for, I don't know, another minute or so, but I'll give you some time to work. Um, the, the, the growth trajectory can be different for different functional areas. And we've had this conversation with several clients where, you know, maybe the sales and marketing function is in one state in terms of growth trajectory in the operations, or maybe the finance function is in a different state. The story I like to share here is we were working with a flooring manufacturing company here in the Twin Cities. And manufacturing, you just kind of assume, well, the growth trajectory is going to be largest for the operations side of the business because if you're growing, you need more capability. And so all the functional leaders were doing this exercise, and there was this interesting moment where the sales leader said, "We slow down, everybody. If we're going to hit this revenue target, that means we need these many leads. We're nowhere near equipped from a sales function to hit that many leads. We need to mature our organization. We need to think about adding regions and territories." And so it was this really neat conversation where in real time we were able to identify a gap in the talent strategy that was going to have a real impact on the business strategy. So doing this functionally is really important. I'm curious, has anybody ever done an exercise like this before? Maybe in the chat you can say yes or no, or is there any kind of points of feedback or questions that this exercise raises up? Not seeing any questions come in. I have a training background, which means I'm comfortable with silence. I will not force anyone to participate. That's okay. I've got moments where I think we'll have more opportunity for kind of collaboration and sharing in a little bit. But I'd encourage you. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. Even just to say I've done some similar stuff before, that's good. That's good validation that this adds value and you've been exposed to it in other areas. Um, and Deanne, I appreciate that as well. Good. Glad you think this would be helpful. Just maybe one final note before I transition to the next slide. So you'll notice that gold box, right? In the next 3 to 5 years, the amount of growth will be transformational versus incremental. The most valuable component of this exercise is having the conversation at the leadership team level. It's really interesting and insightful to do this on your own. It is incredibly helpful to align and make sure everyone is assessing the growth trajectory of the organization consistently. And so that was part of our goal today. I'll reiterate this goal at the end. If you thought this was useful, please share the worksheet with other leaders on your leadership team, because doing it in isolation is good. Doing it as a team, that's where the real insights start to pop up, and where you can maybe work together a little bit more collaboratively on your talent strategy. Okay, let's get into the org chart of the future. We anticipated, so if this is a working session, and if you were filling out some of the questions already, this is where we wanted to spend the majority of the working session time. In essence, it is hard to translate business goals into an org chart of the future. It's kind of it's a bit of a counterintuitive exercise. This is a hugely useful exercise, especially for growing companies, because it really highlights where organizations are going to need to grow or shift, or how it's just going to be different in the future than it is today. So we've got some good exercises to walk through in the next handful of slides. Now, I can't talk about the org chart of the future without just referencing org design as a skill set or a service, right? So org design is hard. As we were preparing for this workshop, we were kind of joking, the webinar team was joking, you can get your PhD in this. So you can go really deep on org design, you can get very technical. I'm going to go a different route today. I'm going to keep it pretty high level, and I'm just going to scrape across the surface in terms of what creating future org charts look like for the kind of clients that we partner with. And so you'll notice there's kind of like these three buckets, or these three phases that companies often go through: early stage, growth state, phase, and maturity. We often play kind of in between growth phase and maturity, right? Where there's some pain points, and a company's trying to transition, either fully into that growth phase and set them up for long-term success, or transition from the growth phase into maturity. And kind of the key takeaway that I want to share at this slide is that getting to maturity is more than just adding roles. And again, this is a very hard problem for many businesses to solve, because as you start to extrapolate your business goals, you start thinking, well, I'll need 2 more sales reps 3 years down the road. I'll need 1 more operations team, so that's an ops manager, and 5 technicians. I'll need that 3 years down the road. Blah 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 blah. We were literally yesterday meeting with a client, and this client they asked all of their business unit leaders to create these long-term business plans. And then they asked us to come in and assess the business plans from a talent perspective, a people perspective. And it was a fascinating conversation. And the whole premise of our discussion with that owner, with that executive, was that, yes, your business unit leaders have done an excellent job thinking about incremental growth, right? And how to add headcount to support the business needs. But the end state is that these functions are going to look very different than the way they are today. And they're not really benchmarked with a mature organization and how a mature organization is structured. So maybe there's teams or departments that are currently aligned with one function and maybe would be better aligned with a different function. And so it was just a really, really interesting conversation that totally was focused on this org chart of the future offering. So let's roll our sleeves back up. All right. So we've got a little bit more working session opportunity. So we're going to just spend maybe 30 seconds, right? And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to think about the current state of your company as it exists today. There's a lot of questions that we work through with clients when we do this in sort of its full workshop format. For the sake of time, for the sake of just like, we don't need to go through the whole process today. I'm just going to ask you to think about the current pain points, right? What needs to change in order for your business to grow? So I'll give you, I don't know, 30 seconds or so to think about that. As you jot something down, I would be curious if you could put it in the chat. And now you're talking about pain points at your company. So you can choose on how transparent you want to be. But I just always think it's interesting in a group like this. We're all kind of peers, right? We're all leaders who have a passion in terms of setting our organizations up for success. What are some of the problems that you're trying to solve? I think there's some inherent learning there. So if you're comfortable as you identify those pain points or what needs to change, I would really love to see some of those examples in the chat. And as I'm looking at the chat, Michelle, thank you for that input. Kelly's quickly winning the participation award. Not that it's competition, but Kelly, you're winning. Building up your operations team, sales leadership. What got us here won't get us there. That's a great quote. Fantastic quote. If you're looking for some extra reading, there's a book out there called The Leadership Pipeline. Ram Shriram is the name of the author. It's a great primer on how to think about org design and what different businesses need at different phases of maturity. I think that quote comes from that book. I think. It's a great quote, though. Alignment with the current team. I like that, Eric. You're right. This absolutely does start to highlight some misalignments. Gets leaders, out of thinking what their individual teams or functions need and what the business needs overall. So I think it's a good call out. More proactive moves. I really like that, Angela. And so, Angela, your comment is a direct response to that slide I shared a little bit ago around we'll just figure it out, right? And Bill's on the call. Bill is my colleague, leads the executive search practice. Bill likes those calls, right? We will always help out when you're like, hey, we need this leader. Can you help us out? Yes, absolutely. But does it also help to be a little bit more thoughtful and a little more strategic around the leadership talent? Make sure you're hiring for the right role rather than sort of this emergency situation that maybe you've accidentally put yourself in. So that's a really, really good comment, Angela. Really good comment. Okay, so here's where the magic starts to happen. And I'll have to go back to Mike Fromalt. He created this tool, and it is an absolutely fantastic tool. And we've used it in talks and we've used it with clients. And what this tool does is it forces leaders to think about what are the expectations on the functional in the business today, and based on our growth goals, where do we expect those expectations to shift? How are they going to grow or increase? And so, this is included in your worksheet. Full transparency, I said those blue boxes weren't a typo. I don't know why that V is up there. There's nothing that V means. That should just be a blue box. So I'll own that one. So this is in your worksheet. This is a great, great resource to spend a little bit more time and energy on when you're just kind of like sitting down and you've got some time to focus on it. We don't have enough time today to really, like let you kind of roll up your sleeve. It's a working session, but it's not a full working session. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. But just to kind of breathe a little bit of life from a hypothetical perspective, right? If you're trying to double your customer base, right? Might that also include new products? Are you going to be in more locations? Especially for some of the manufacturing clients that we work with, or the the goods producers that we work with, if they're shifting from being kind of like a regional company to a national company, well, now you've maybe got distribution centers in various locations across the country. And so that really starts to influence what kind of leadership you need in your organization. And so obviously this is just for operations, right? The growth trajectory exercise was just for operations. This 5-year org chart is just for operations. When we're doing this kind of like full on, we would do it for all functions of the business. But for today, it's kind of just spotlighting what the operations org chart of the future questions look like. So all of that gets us now to creating that future org chart. And when we're doing this full exercise, people write it down and then they share it and they say, hey, this is what I think it's going to look like. And then we gather some input and we, again, make sure we're all aligned at a leadership team level. There's a lot of questions that we go through to make sure our org charts of the future are thoughtful and they're descriptive in terms of meeting the needs of the future organization. And that gold question is the one that's in your worksheet. What barriers or challenges might hinder our success? So we're at the 45-minute mark, got a little bit of content, and I want to save some time for question and answer, but I do think it would be useful. Just to, again, 30 seconds, what barriers or challenges might hinder our success? And then as you're typing, again, if you want to share, I think there's a lot of learning that can be had. It's always good to know barriers or challenges that other people are working through. I've always found it normalizes some of the challenges that we experience in our companies. Kelly, for those of you who are keeping track, Kelly just added more distance to his participation gold star. Nice job not aligning function to the client needs as well as internal needs. So there's a disconnect there. That's excellent. Yeah, responsiveness. Yes, external pressures. That's a great one, Joe. And I'm going to just kind of expand a little bit, Joe, on what you just said, right? This is a very useful, when you're thinking about talent strategies as a way to minimize uncertainty. It's useful when you're sort of establishing those business strategies. It's also important as you're adjusting those business. So as external forces are putting pressure on your business strategies, that's going to necessarily have a downstream impact on your talent strategies. So that's a really good one. I appreciate you calling that out. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership team preparedness, and then we'll wrap for the day. We'll do a wrap up, and then we'll officially wrap up the webinar. So there's this great story that often gets told here at Strategic Talent Partners, and I want to say it's a true story. I believe it's true, but I've heard it shared a handful of times. The intent is based in reality. Maybe I'll add that as a little bit of a disclaimer. And so the story goes like this. It's on the search side of the business, right? And we're working with this bank, okay? So the search team goes to the bank and they meet with maybe the board of directors, we'll just say. And the intent is to learn about the needs of the bank because they want to hire a bank president, right? So we've been brought in and we're going to hire the next president for this bank. And so we start talking to the board and we start, kind of asking them questions about their business. And, we start talking about, their culture and, inevitably we'll end up talking about, different roles in the organization. And here's the punchline of the joke is that a bank, when you ask them, tell us what makes for a good bank teller, they know everything, right? Like they know qualifications, they know, what kind of personality attributes they're looking for. They've got this very specific set of criteria. And then you ask them, well, what would make for a good bank president? And they're like, well, I'm not really sure. I haven't really thought about it as much. And the irony, of course, the reason that hopefully you find that a little bit funny is that a bank teller is this frontline employee, right? And it's not that they are an unimportant team member, but they're not influencing strategy. The overall health of the business isn't incumbent on a bank teller. versus a bank president who has a huge impact on the growth of the business and the overall strategy of the organization. And there's just a lot less thought and emphasis placed on what the skills of this role need to contain, what the characteristics of this leader should be. And so basically what we're talking about here is there's this discrepancy that leadership teams and owners often find themselves where, you're thinking about maybe what a role is required for today, sort of the immediate business needs, and then what is going to be expected of that role based on our growth goals. If we could extrapolate 3-ish years down the road, how might that role change? In your worksheets is another exercise. This is another one of those super useful exercises that is absolutely worthwhile to spend some time thinking about. We don't have time to do it today. And it's kind of an individual exercise too. So I'll give you a little bit of a primer on how this exercise works, specifically around leadership team preparedness. Here's the deal. As a leadership role grows and evolves and matures, as the business grows and evolves and matures, where that leader spends time will shift. And so when we're working with a client, we will often ask them to say, based on these fairly standard, common expectations of, and what we're looking at here is an operations leader. How much of this are you doing today? And how much of it are you going to be doing in the next 3 years? And I was just doing this with a client in December, and it was fascinating to hear everyone's perspective around, I'm actually doing a lot of this today, but I would argue that that's not a good thing. I'm doing too much of this today. So in the next 3 years, I would hope that my time in this specific activity goes way, way down. And then that frees me up to be more thoughtful and purposeful in these other 2 or 3 things. And so it really starts to highlight, where am I today? How does my role need to start to change and evolve over time to meet the business needs? Oh, Sophie, thank you. I guess it's going to be in the addendum. So I appreciate that input in real time there, Sophie. Thanks. This one is, if I recall. So this one is genuinely in the exercise. So what the content on this slide is really recognizing is that in addition to sort of the job description components, right? So the previous slide that we were looking at is really about the line items of the things that an operations leader does on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. This is really about the competencies that are used to define success for the leader's role. And remember, we're talking about leadership team preparedness. And so leadership team preparedness is about not over-indexing around what its success looks like for today. It's also starting to have line of sight around what success is going to look like moving forward. And so if I was to take a step back, right? So the growth trajectory helps us think about how much growth are we trying to bite off, right? What's the volume and the pace that we're trying to grow? And then the org chart of the future, that's sort of this visual representation of the growth. And then we can roll the org chart of the future back up so we can start to understand what is the profile of a senior leader that's going to be successful based on this org chart of the future. And so that success profile, we talk to a lot of executives, both on the search side and on the solution side. And the it inevitably boils down to the 4 competencies that you see on the screen: technical knowledge and skills, strategic thinking, leadership abilities, and culture builder. And again, I'll have to give Bill credit. He's on the call, at least he was on the call. He's done a lot of talking about, what are the characteristics, what are the competencies the good leader needs to have in order to operate at that executive level. And we do this with clients. There's kind of usually a couple of very specific learning to come out of this exercise. Most leaders, most executives hold on to technical knowledge and skills a little bit longer than they should. And it's never well, it's always important. I was going to use a double negative. It's always important, but is it the most important thing? And so all four are important to be successful. How you prioritize, how much you weight each four of these competencies, that's really where you start to be able to grow and evolve and make sure you're operating in a way as an executive that's going to be best to drive growth in your organization. And so in your worksheets, there are questions around the current state, the future state, and then bullets that I want to utilize more. And maybe that's where this will be the last exercise with the worksheet that we'll do in today's webinar. As you're looking at all the bullets that fall under these four competency areas, what are 2 or 3 that I'm not doing today that maybe I'm going to be expected to do more frequently in the future? So I'll give you 30 seconds or a minute to focus on that. It'll also give me a chance to answer Ron's question. So, Ron, we have a couple of different ways that we assess leaders. We use psychometric validated leadership assessments. We've got a couple of them in our portfolio that we use. And then, not surprisingly, strategic talent partners, we're very trained at interviewing and evaluating both strengths and development opportunities in leaders. It's, kind of the core capability on our search teams. And we certainly leverage that capability from a solutions perspective as well. So we take a couple of different, it's usually part interview, part assessment, and then we also do 360 surveys as well. So usually you can kind of string together different sets of inputs to create a holistic understanding of the leader's ability. And your point, self-assessment value. I think self-assessment, and I'm just going to kind of push this a little bit further forward based on where I think you're going. The self-assessment value is you start to create a sense of the delta. Where are we today? Where is my role today? Where is my role going to need to grow? Leadership team preparedness, the whole intent is to say, I will likely need to be doing things a little bit differently in the future than I am today. So this is not a development exercise per se. This really is just a way to start to conceptualize how much my role is going to change based on our growth goals and our future org chart. Okay. We've just got, we're getting close to being at the end of our time. We've got about 10 minutes before we officially wrap, but I do want to leave any time for questions. So hopefully you were able to identify a couple of bullets. You don't have to share. That's kind of what I was trying to say. Now, I mentioned growth leadership at the beginning of this webinar. I also alluded to a past webinar on growth leadership. So if you are interested to, that flat versus growth leader chart, if you're interested to learn more, we've got really good stuff on our website. There's a whole webinar devoted to that topic specifically. When we start talking about leadership team preparedness, this is a very useful model. And I'll just kind of speak to the main concepts of growth leadership, which is that in a growing organization, growth leaders need to have the right mindset, the right skill set, and the right systems. And the right mindset really means, does this individual think of themselves as a leader? Were they sort of back-ended into a leadership or a management position? Or were they prepared? Are they grounded in the expectations? Do they internalize the fact that they are a leader responsible for driving growth in your company? Skill set really requires a leader to be trained, educated, proficient in the key skills of people management, holding people accountable, coaching and feedback, evaluating, developing talent. And then systems is basically, do you have the processes in place in order to drive change and execute? And so in some regards, that's kind of your tried and true management systems, performance management, succession planning. It's also just good leadership habits that get baked into your company and your company processes. But again, if you're curious about growth leadership, There's a lot more. You can access it on our website, especially that past webinar. All right, so we are done with our working session portion of the webinar. Thank you for working through your worksheets and filling in that content and sharing your perspective. This website or this webinar is called Solve the Uncertainty, right? So where does the uncertainty come from? The uncertainty comes from the growth dilemma, the business growing at a faster pace than the talent and the leadership has the opportunity to catch up. The growth dilemma unintentionally leading to flat leadership in an organization. And then maybe the coincidental impact of not having a talent strategy to match up to the business strategy and the risk that that can pose to a business as it continues to grow. So how do you solve the uncertainty? You look at your growth trajectory, you make sure that as a leadership team, we're aligned, that we understand the impact that our growth goals are going to have on our company, and that we're using those insights to start to chart out that future org chart, right? And we can visually represent what our business is going to look like as we grow. And then again, you're using that to go back up to the leadership team and you're saying, are we prepared, right? How do we need to think differently about our roles so that we don't get totally wrapped up in just meeting the challenges of today? We're also preparing to drive sustainable growth in our company. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for your time today. Hope this was valuable. This is my last, I want your input exercise, okay? So I am curious in the chat, what was either your biggest aha moment or what's one action you're going to take? I committed to this being a valuable hour, a good use of your time. What are you going to do with it? I'm curious. So I'm going to guess that Kelly's going to share first. Maybe somebody else can race to the finish line. Kelly, I feel like I put you on the spot now. Oh, as a facilitator, you can wait. I appreciate that. That's good. Ron, thank you. Get the leadership team to go beyond self-assessment and talk about future need. Yes, honest conversation. I'm going to share one quick anecdote, Ron, about honest conversation. It's not an intuitive conversation for a lot of leadership teams to have, right? Like there's not a lot of natural entry points to this conversation. And so it tends to get kind of brushed by the wayside. And I was doing this exercise with a client, and the owner of the company at the end of it said, it makes sense now. I can see what growth is going to start to look like. And so those honest conversations really put that leadership team in a position where they could more earnestly work on their business strategy because they were more aligned in terms of what the organization needed out of them. So it's a great comment. Need to think about financial management will be more complex as we grow. That's a great point, Stephen. It's often a conversation that we have where it's like, well, does the company need a CFO? Do they need a VP of finance? Do they need a controller? You might have a very clear understanding in the sort of specific need, but if you start thinking about business growth, if your financial needs are going to get more complex, that might shift how you think about hiring for that role. So that's a great point. Yeah, Eric, sharing with your current team, I would absolutely encourage you to do that. This worksheet is intended to be shared. It's a great exercise, best used in collaboration with other leaders. I've alluded to this a handful of times. We do this with clients. So we wanted to give you a taste today. We wanted to set you up for success, teach you how to do it. If you have some drive and passion on this, we also are happy to partner with you if you're interested in really leveraging the full capability that strategic talent partners can provide around creating your talent roadmap. So it's a little short snippet of what that service offering looks like. Hopefully a lot of these terms resonate now, right? We've already talked about the vast majority of the topics that get discussed in this full service offering. And it's a ton of fun. It's just a blast working with owners and leadership teams on this talent roadmap offering. So with that, I will say thank you. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you for all the comments in the chat. We're going to be sending out a recording of this as well. So if you want to share it with anyone else in your organization or other interested leaders, obviously we appreciate that. But other than that, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.